To continue our story. The story of Gulliver's Travels. Part 2. Chapter 3. One day at dinner, this malicious. Yeah, it's malicious. This malicious little cup was so nettled with something I had said to him that, raising himself upon the frame of Her Majesty's chair, he took me up by the middle as I was sitting down, not thinking any harm, and let me drop into a large silver bowl of cream, and then ran away as fast as he could. I fell over head and ears, and if I had not been a good swimmer, might have gone very hard with me. For Glumdalclitch, in that instant, happened to be at the other end of the room, and the Queen was in such a fright that she wanted presence of mind to assist me. But my little nurse ran to my relief and took me out after I had swallowed above a quart of cream. I was put to bed. However, I received no other damage than the loss of a suit of clothes, which was utterly spoiled. The dwarf was so soundly whipped, and as a farther punishment, forced to drink up the bowl of cream into which he had thrown me. Neither was he ever restored to favour, for soon after the Queen bestowed him on a lady of high quality, so that I saw him no more, to my very great satisfaction, for I could not tell to what extremities such a malicious urchin might have carried his resentment. For I could not tell to what extremities such a malicious urchin might have carried his resentment. Extremities, okay. Extremities. Extremities. Okay, extremities. For I could not tell to what extremities such a malicious urchin might have carried his resentment. He had before served me a scurvy trick, which set the Queen a-laughing, although at the same time she was heartily vexed, and would have immediately cashiered him, if I had not been so generous as to intercede. Cashiered, that's an interesting word. What does it mean?
Cashier.
Cashiered. It means to dismiss someone from out of disgrace because of serious misdemeanor. Cashiered.
Cashier.
Cashier. And would have immediately cashiered him if I had not been so generous as to intercede. Her Majesty had taken a marrow bone upon her plate, and, after knocking out the marrow, placed the bone again in the dish erect, as it stood before the dwarf, watching his opportunity, while Glumdalclitch was gone to the sideboard, mounted the stool that he stood on to take care of me at meals, took me up in both hands, and squeezing my legs together, wedged them into the marrow bone above my waist, where I stuck for some time, and made a very ridiculous figure. I believe it was near a minute before anyone knew what was become of me. for I thought it blew me to cry out. For I thought it below me, below. For I thought it below me to cry out. But as Princess Solemn get their meat hot, my legs were not scalded, only my stockings and breeches in a sad condition. The dwarf, at my entreaty, had no other punishment than a sound whipping. I was frequently rallied by the queen upon account of my fearfulness, and she used to ask me whether the people of my country were as great cowards as myself. The occasion was this. The kingdom is much pestered with flies in summer, and these odious insects, odious, let's see how it's pronounced. Odious, okay. These odious insects, each of them as big as a dunce table, lark, hardly gave me any rest while I sat at dinner, with their continual humming and buzzing about mine ears. They would sometimes alight upon my victuals and leave their loathsome excrement or spawn behind, which to me was very visible, though not to the natives of that country, whose large optics were not so acute as mine, in viewing smaller objects. Loathsome excrement. It's an interesting word. See how it's pronounced.
Loathsome.
Loathsome. There is an tha. There is an interesting tha. Loathsome. Loathsome.
Loathsome.
Loathsome. They're loathsome. 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 I don't know how they pronounce it. Loathsome. They're loathsome. Loathsome excrement. And leave their loathsome excrement. Loathsome. It's very hard, very difficult for the tongue to get it. Loathsome. Okay. Their loathsome excrement, or spawn behind, which to me was very visible, though not to the natives of that country, whose large optics were not so acute as mine, in viewing smaller objects. Sometimes they would fix upon my nose or forehead, where they stung me to the quick, smelling very offensively, and I could easily trace that vicious matter, which our naturalists tell us enables those creatures to walk with their feet upwards upon a ceiling. I had much ado to defend myself against these detestable animals, and could not forbear starting when they came on my face. It was the common practice of the dwarf to catch a number of these insects in his hand, as schoolboys do among us, and let them out suddenly under my nose on purpose, to frighten me and divert the queen. My remedy was to cut them in pieces with my knife as they flew in the air, wherein my dexterity was much admired. Dexterity. I remember this means courage, probably. Dexterity. Skill in performing tasks, especially with hands. Dexterity, okay. Wherein my dexterity was much admired. I remember one morning when Glimmerdeklitch had set me in a box upon a window, as she usually did in fair days, to give me air, for I durst not venture to let the box be hung on a nail out of the window, as we do with cages in England. After I had lifted up one of my sashes and sat down at my table to eat a piece of sweet cake for my breakfast, above 20 wasps, allured by the smell, came flying into the room, humming louder than the drones of as many bagpies, drones of as many bagpipes, of as many bagpipes. Some of them seized my cake and carried it piecemeal away. Others flew about my head and face, confounding me with the noise and putting me in the utmost terror of their stings. However, I had the courage to rise and draw my hanger and attack them in the air. I dispatched 4 of them, but the rest got away, and I presently shut my window. These insects were as large as partridges. I took out their stings, found them 1.5 inches long, and as sharp as needles. I carefully preserved them all, and having since shown them, with some other curiosities, in several parts of Europe, upon my return to England, I gave 3 of them to the Gresham College, and kept the 4th for myself. Chapter 4. Let's see. Chapter 4. The country described. A proposal for correcting modern maps. The King's Palace, and some account of the metropolis. The author's way of traveling. The chief temple described. I now intend to give the reader a short description of this country, as far as I travelled in it, which was not above 2,000 miles around. Which was not above 2,000 miles round. Lure Prolograd, the metropolis. For the Queen, whom I always attended, never went farther when she accompanied. For the Queen, whom I always attended, never went farther when she accompanied the King in his progresses, and there stayed till his Majesty returned from viewing his frontiers. The whole extent of this princess's dominions reaches about 6,000 miles in length, and from 3 to 5 in breadth. Whence I cannot but conclude that our geographers of Europe are in great error by supposing nothing but sea between Japan and California. For it was ever my opinion that there must be a balance of earth to counterpoise the great continent of Tartary, and therefore they ought to correct their maps and charts by joining this vast tract of land to the northwest parts of America, wherein I shall be ready to lend them my assistance. The kingdom is a peninsula, terminated to the northeast by a ridge of mountains 30 miles high, which are altogether impassable, by reason of the volcanoes upon the tops. neither do the most learned know what sort of mortals inhabit beyond those mountains, or whether they be inhabited at all. On on the three other sides, it is bounded by the ocean. There is not one seaport in the whole kingdom, and those parts of the coasts into which the rivers issue are so full of pointed rocks, and the sea generally so rough that there is no venturing with the smallest of their boats, so that these people are wholly excluded from any commerce with the rest of the world. But the large rivers are full of vessels, and abound with the excellent fish, for they seldom get any from the sea, because the sea fish are of the same size with those in Europe, and consequently not worth catching, whereby it is manifest that nature, in the production of plants and animals of so extraordinary a bulk, is wholly confined to this continent, of which I leave the reasons to be determined by philosophers. However, now and then they take a whale that happens to be dashed against the rocks, which the common people feed on heartily. These whales I have known so large that a man could hardly carry one upon his shoulders. And sometimes, for curiosity, they are brought in hampers to Lurb whatever. I saw one of them in a dish at the king's table, which passed for a rarity, but I did not observe he was fond of it, for I think, indeed, the bigness disgusted him, although I have seen one somewhat larger in Greenland. The country is well inhabited, for it contains 51 cities, near 100 walled towns, and a great number of villages. To satisfy my curious reader, it may be sufficient to describe Lorb Rillegrud. This city stands upon almost two equal parts. On each side, the river that passes through it contains above 80,000 houses and about 600,000 inhabitants. It is in length 3 glumgalangs, which make about 54 English miles, and 2.5 in breadth, as I measured it myself in the royal map, made by the king's order, which was laid on the ground on purpose for me, and extended 100 feet. I paced the diameter and circumference several times barefoot, and computing by the scale measured it pretty exactly. The king's palace is no regular edifice, but a heap of buildings, about 7 miles round. The chief rooms are generally 240 feet high, and broad and long in proportion. A coach was allowed to Glimedeklich and me. Glamdelaklich and me, wherein her governesses frequently took her out to see the town, or go among the shops, and I was always of the party carried in my box, although the girl, at my own desire, would often take me out and hold me in her hand, that I might more conveniently view the houses and the people, as we passed along the streets. I reckoned our coach to be about a square of Westminster. Hall, but not altogether so high. However, I cannot be very exact. One day the governess ordered our coachman to stop at several shops, where the beggars, watching their opportunity, crowded to the sides of the coach and gave me the most horrible spectacle that ever a European eye beheld. There was a woman with a cancer in her breast, swelled to a monstrous size, full of holes, in two or three of which I could have easily crept, and covered my whole body. There was a fellow with a wen in his neck, larger than 5 wool packs, and another with a couple of wooden legs, each about 20 feet high. But the most hateful sight of all was the lice crawling on their clothes. I could see distinctly the limbs of these vermin with my naked eye, much better than those of a European louse through a microscope. And their snouts with which they rotted like swine. They were the first I had ever beheld, and I should have been curious enough to dissect one of them if I had had proper instruments, which I unluckily left behind me in the ship. Unluckily left behind me in the ship. Although indeed the sight was so nauseous that it perfectly turned my stomach. Besides the large box in which I was usually carried, the Queen ordered a smaller one to be made for me, of about 12 feet square and 10 high, for the convenience of travelling, because the other was somewhat too large for Glammaticlich's lap, and cumbersome in the coach. It was made by the same artist, whom I directed in the whole contrivance. This travelling closet was an exact square, with a window in the middle of 3 of the squares, and each window was latticed with iron wire on the outside. It's an interesting word. That's how it's pronounced.
Latticed.
Latticed, okay. And each window was latticed with iron wire on the outside to prevent accidents in long journeys. On the fourth side, which had no window, 2 strong stables were fixed, through which the person that carried me when I had a mind to be on horseback put a leathern belt and buckled it about his waist. This was always the office of some grave trusty servant in whom I could confide. Whether I attended the king and queen in their progresses, or were disposed to see the gardens, or pay a visit to some great lady or minister of state in the court, when Glumdalclitch happened to be out of order, for I soon began to be known and esteemed among the greatest officers, I suppose more upon account of their Majesty's favour than any merit of my own. In journeys when I was weary of the coach, a servant on horseback would buckle on my box and place it upon a cushion before him, and there I had a full prospect of the country on 3 sides, from my 3 windows. I had, in this closet, a field bed and a hammock hung from the ceiling, 2 chairs and a table, neatly screwed to the floor, to prevent being tossed about by the agitation of the horse or the coach, and having been long used to sea voyages, those motions, although sometimes very violent, did not much discompose me. Okay, that will be it for today, and I will see you in the next one.